Afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the meeting. Just like to start the meeting with the appointment of chair. Mr. Richardson was nominated as chairman-elect at the County Council meeting held on 17th of May 2023. Can I ask for a nominator, please, and a seconder?
I'll nominate that.
Thank you. I'll hand over to Mr. Richardson.
Thank you very much. Welcome to today's meeting of the Adults, Communities Overview and Scrutiny Committee. As usual, the meeting is being broadcast live to the public, so welcome to any members of the public who are online. For those not able to watch live, the webcast will be recorded and made available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. Before we begin, can I remind everyone to only turn on their microphones when you wish to speak or are invited to speak, and turn them off when you've finished. I've received apologies from Mrs. Taylor and Mr. Charlesworth for the joint reports. I believe we should have some people join us online. Jonathan Morgan, Chair of the Health and Wellbeing Committee, is online, and I believe that Mike Sandys, the Director of Public Health, will be joining us online shortly, hopefully. Agenda item 2, we're now moving on to the election of the Deputy Chairman, and I would like to nominate Councillor Nick Chapman, to be Deputy. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Leon. All those in favour? Thank you. Can't vote against yourself. We now have the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of March 2023. I propose the minutes of the meeting are taken as read, confirmed as signed. Is that agreed? Very happy. Thank you. Weren't here, agenda item 4, question time. I've received no questions from members of the public. Agenda item 5, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I've received no questions from members. Agenda item 6, to advise or any other items the chairman has decided to take as urgent. No such items have come forward. Agenda item 7, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Betty.
Any items pertaining to health, because I have family members working in health, and if anything comes through on that, I would just like to keep myself safe and declare an interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty. As for myself, there is a recommendation within the rules that we have 2 joint papers on this afternoon, agenda items 10 and 11, both of which are with the Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I've been asked to make the committee aware that obviously my wife, which I think is well known to everybody, is the cabinet portfolio holder for health. And therefore, are you comfortable with me carrying on chairing the meeting during those agenda items? Bearing in mind, we're looking at strategies, we're not questioning the member directly. Everybody comfortable? Yeah. Thank you all. It's very kind. I would hate you to have run out of the room, but I could have had a cup of tea and a pork pie had you said yes. Declarations of the party whip. Do any members have any declarations from their party whips? No, thank you. Agenda item 9, presentation of petitions under Standing Order 36. No such petitions been received, and therefore we're going on to top stress diet. That's useful, isn't it? So we're going on to agenda item 10, which is the Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland Joint Living Well with Dementia Strategy 2024 to 28. I welcome members and officers for the Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee who have joined us at this meeting for the presentation of this joint report. The Director of Adults Communities, John Wilson, will present the report, supported by the Assistant Director for Strategic Commissioning, Inderjit, and the Head of Service Commissioning, Kate. I think if you take it as read, we've all read the myriad number of papers, John. I'm sure you won't go through them individually, and perhaps just point out a few highlights to us if that's the way forward.
Thank you, Chair. I shan't go through the paper at all. I shall be handing over to Kate very shortly. Just by way of introduction, as members are probably aware, this is the 3rd joint integrated dementia strategy across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland with our partners in Leicester City, Rutland Council and the ICB. The previous strategy was due to end in 2022, but due to the pandemic and then recovering from the pandemic, that strategy, it was agreed that that strategy would be held over to allow sufficient time to engage prior to the development of the draft that you see before you today. So without further ado, I shall hand over to Kate.
Thank you. As John said, this is to present to you the draft Living Well with Dementia strategy, which is proposed to run from 2024 to 2028. And following consideration by this committee, the proposal is that the papers would go on to Cabinet on the 23rd of June with a request to go out for formal public consultation on the draft strategy. The current strategy was agreed in 2018 by the partner organisations, and a strong partnership approach is something that's been really beneficial in the current strategy period, but also in the development of the new. The paper that you've got not only sets out the proposed new strategy and consultation documents, but also gives some headlines on the achievements during the current strategy period. And those include the strong partnership across Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland from local authorities, the ICB and other partner organisations, but critically those with lived experience of dementia. A further achievement is development of approaches within primary care, the inclusion within the joint strategic needs assessment of a chapter specifically focused on dementia needs within the Leicestershire area. The re-procurement of the dementia support service, which includes the Leicestershire area, and rolling out of information and advice services to people with dementia and those who are either family members or care for them. We also have a positive behaviour support team which works with adult social care providers who support people with dementia to further approaches relating to positive behaviour. In terms of challenges, I'm sure you've identified yourselves from the paper that diagnosis rates do vary across the Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland area, with the county area having significantly lower diagnosis rates than the city area. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. During the COVID period, dementia diagnosis rates reduced as a result of the diagnosis services being paused due to the COVID period, and that was the case across the country rather. In recent years, we've found that the diagnosis clinics are focused on the city area, which means that there is less accessibility of diagnosis support in the county area. And that's going to be a focus, or one of the focuses of the new strategy. And officers will work closely with ICB colleagues to ensure that diagnosis rates continue to improve via a range of measures during the strategy period. Looking at focuses for the new strategy then, I've already identified one of them, but paragraph 12 of the report gives some extremely helpful feedback, which was gleaned through Healthwatch research, which they did with people who have experience of dementia. And that sets out a range of things that people experience within Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland, and proposals for the new strategy, which are being taken into account. I'll leave it there in terms of my presentation, other than just to say that the next step would be onward consideration by Cabinet with a request to go out to public consultation on the draft strategy. The consultation document is within your pack. That's not the only way in which consultation will be undertaken with the people of Leicester, Leicestershire and Rutland. We'll also be undertaking events. Any feedback that people want to give us during the consultation period, however that's received, will be incorporated into the summary, which will then come to scrutiny in the autumn. prior to finalisation of the strategy, and we hope for a launch in the early new year, early 2024. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Kate. I'll just remind members that towards the end we're asked to make any recommendations towards Cabinet to help with our deliberation. So, I mean, please ask any questions you feel free, but also if you've got anything that you wish Cabinet to consider, it would be worth bringing it up at this meeting. It can be minuted and passed them for their considerations. So the first person to go is Councillor Barry Champion.
Thank you, Chair. Hey, thanks for that report. The item I wanted to pick up on was this diagnosis rates. Obviously, for family members, they've probably been through many months, even years, thinking that they've got a family member with dementia. And then when they get to that stage when they really want the help, the professional help to get them into the system. And this comes from personal experience of an aunt that went through this, and my mother going for probably a couple of years trying to get out. So it's really important that we get this up. Now, I see that they've recognised that centralising hasn't worked and it needs to go out further afield. I guess it would be interesting to have actually had a bit more understanding of how much they're going to expand out, what the timescales are going to be when this kind of thing is going to be up and running, and what their target rates are going to be. Thank you.
I think that is yet to be planned in detail. ICB colleagues have committed to working on diagnosis arrangements within the county so that they're more accessible for people within rural areas. It's for each of the stakeholder organisations within the LLR strategy to define their action planning and delivery planning arrangements for the strategy period, but that's not to say that there won't be challenge and support from officers from other organisations, so the County Council to the ICB, to ensure that those arrangements are put in place in a timely fashion. And that's one of the key things that we will be looking at as one of the measurables that can come out of this strategy in terms of how we work to addressing that balance between the city reasonable diagnosis rates and the county, which are below where they should be at the moment.
So when it comes to recommendations, what we'd like to see, I think some of that detail does need to come out, because obviously for us in each of our divisions, we need to be able to go back to our residents and say to them, this is where you will be able to go from now, that kind of thing. So I kind of think that detail is probably the stuff we need. Thank you.
Before I call you in, Betty, I know John just wants to respond to this point.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think that's a very fair and reasonable request. We've got approximately, well, we've got the formal consultation, which is the 8-week period, but obviously we've got 6 months before we're due to take the final report back to Cabinet for approval. So I think within that period, and certainly when we take the final report, there will be a Leicestershire-based action plan that goes alongside the strategy. And I think what we should aim to achieve is some of that detail in that action plan before we go back to Cabinet for the final approval. Because I think you're absolutely right. And in terms of what we want to achieve, it seems to me the bare minimum we want to achieve is the national figure. The national target should be our bare minimum, it would seem to me.
Well, thank you, John. Betty.
Thank you. I suppose mine cuts across page 15 and 16. It was really page 15 is the last bullet point before this says the studies actively supporting people to remain independent. It actually says it requires further improvements, and I just wondered what is actually being done to make that much more robust. And I'd like to tie that up with page 16 in terms of lack of literacy skills, because that's really an issue that cuts across adult social care and public health, for people who really are struggling with literacy skills in terms of them being able to say what they need, what the requirements are, what help they can get, just what is being done to help people who are not just not articulate, but not able to put anything down on paper. Thank you, Chair.
Just in terms of the first part of your question around promoting independence, I think this is probably something that we'll never cease striving for in terms of continuing to promote independence. It's one of the key aims of all adult social care, and I think there's a range of ways in which we can promote better independence. That can be through working with informal carers. It can be through formal adult social care services in terms of the way that we contract, monitor and contract manage and support adult social care providers to better promote independence. Where applicable, we can work with community groups on promoting independence. And I think there's a number of ways right the way across the partnership that all partners can work towards improving independence for people with dementia. In terms of literacy, sorry, was the question specifically related to people being able to give feedback on the strategy? Yeah.
God. Sorry, it's not that people, if they're illiterate, quite often find it difficult to be able to articulate their needs in many different ways. And I just wondered how much that's taken into consideration. I mean, we can sit here and we can talk for Britain around this table, basically, but somebody who really is an articulate really struggles to say what their needs are and how we reach those and how we are actually able to assist those in moving forward in terms of getting their needs met. That's what I'm really interested in that one.
Yeah, I don't have the figures in front of me, but I would imagine that for individuals who struggle with literacy, that as you've said, they may find that difficult to describe to professionals, to access advice and information and so forth. And that will be something that we take into account in the next strategy period. One of the ways in which we will do that is through what we were talking about earlier around the diagnosis arrangements, and the ICB have said that seldom heard or difficult to reach groups of people, which will include people who struggle with literacy, will be incorporated into those planning arrangements as well.
Leon.
Teacher, these numbers are very interesting numbers. They are talking about dementia diagnostic rates. What is the methodology exactly to estimate these rates? Because you see, if I understand well, we're talking actually for the ones who do have dementia, 62% are diagnosed. Is the methodology the same actually in Leicester and in the outside area?
Answer this because I looked it up directly before this meeting to make sure I could describe it correctly. Yes, you can hear me now. So the way it's determined is the number of people thought to have dementia within an area set against those who are actually diagnosed in the area. And that's how they determine the diagnosis rate. So they look at a range of demographic information to try to work out what the prevalence of dementia would be in that geographical area. And of those individuals, they then say, well, what proportion of the population are actually diagnosed? And that gives you the diagnosis rates, and that's a common methodology across the country.
Who does this?
Can't answer that for certain, but it may well be Office for National Statistics, or it could be health bodies that do that.
I'm sorry, I'm a bit confused because you see, usually the health bodies, CQC or whatever, they just get the information from GP clinics and GP centers or other centers. I mean, I'm just a bit unsure about actually the robustness of the methodology to collect this information.
I'm afraid I can't answer that in any more detail than I've already given. I'm not analytical expert, but suffice it to say that there is a common methodology across the country for collecting it, and that I'm sure is subject to scrutiny nationally.
Could I perhaps suggest that I know this is a passion for Leon's of understanding this. Could we actually find out and let members of the committee know? And
Absolutely.
Particularly Leon, that would be extremely useful if we could. Are you happy with that, Leon? Bill?
Thank you. Yes, can I ask about the consultation? I noticed on page 17, item 22 and 23, it's mainly on the internet rather than any other methods. You've got things that will be done by partner organisations, adult social care providers, unpaid carers. How are you going to get out to them? You've got your own newspaper that goes out 4 times a year, is it, Chair? Is it 4 times a year? Will it be in there? And why can't we do something with the parish councils to inform them what's going off so they can pass it through to the people and any other bodies? I mean, in my area, we've got the local forums, South Wixton, Wixton, and Oadby. However, quite a lot of people go to those, and it could be worth having that information available at those sort of forums, just to get it out there. Why? Because I'm always concerned about doing things on the internet. We are excluding a large proportion of the population who may be in this category. Talking one myself,
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The partners will have a range of different activities during the consultation period. Online is just one of those, and we recognise the importance of actually going out and speaking to people. For unpaid carers, family members, people who are experiencing dementia themselves, they don't necessarily have the time, or it makes sense for us to describe that to them in more straightforward terms, to actually have a face-to-face conversation with them. So I think all of the suggestions that you've made are excellent, and we'll make sure that we broadcast it as far and wide during the consultation period as possible. So if members have any particular avenues that they'd like us to explore during that period, then absolutely we will take those up.
Thanks, Kate. I think it's a very valid point, Bill. I know that, it must be 3 or 4 years ago now. In fact, in this room, we had a session on communication and how to achieve it. So it might be worthwhile, and I don't think it's for any one individual committee. Perhaps through your scrutiny commissioner, you get the commissioners talking about whether or not perhaps a further session like that for members who can put forward sessions to have a look at again might be worthwhile for consideration, because it is a key point. I think we're as concerned as officers. I mean, officers want the best information from the most number of people on which to make decisions. So again, it may be worth, I said, going through your scrutiny commissioner. I think we can raise it with ours to see if it's time for another look at that. But you want to come back, Betty?
More on a positive note, if you don't mind. I've had to draw up documents like this myself when I worked at the university, and can I say the document's actually a really good document. I had a good look at it and well done. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been developed by the partnership. There's been a lot of thought gone into it by a number of officers across all of the organisations. Thank you. I'll pass that on.
You look like you want to come in, John.
Just to say, just a quick Google search. So the dementia diagnostic data is an NHS digital report, which is based on primary care level data. So what they do is they take the primary care data from each primary care practice. As Kate said, they set that against the expected level of dementia prevalence for the area, and they build it up from there. So that's how it's a national collection. So it's done the same across wherever you are in the country. It's the same data collection.
Sorry, I have to say this one because I'm troubling myself actually how they do that, because it sounds to me like actually they have a multivariate model with logistic regression analysis, where they say actually this demographic, this area has this demographics, this ethnicity, etc., 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 and they calculate the approximate number, and then they see how many patients have been diagnosed, and they divide this by the projected number out of a multivariate model. This is the case.
I would imagine so, yeah. But the methodology is consistent.
I think the point you're making, John, is that there should be no way that the methodology is different to the city, to the county, and therefore the county is still disproportionately out of kilter with it. I think there are no further questions. Just a couple from myself. We've spoken a lot about the diagnostic side of things. And I know, John, you've given a commitment, which is most welcome, that you'll come back with some thoughts on how an action plan to speed up getting this across the county might be done. I just wonder if in the questionnaire itself we're missing the trick. There seems to be no section on asking, particularly members of the public who've been through it or their carers, about what was their experience of diagnosis. And it just strikes me that to ask people who've actually been through the procedure how they found getting access to diagnosis, how they found it, etc., might be very valuable, particularly coming back to the point made by Bill about communication. So how did they hear about it? Where did they go to, etc.? And the other point I'd like to bring up as well, I was, for my sins, I was reading the All-Party Parliamentary Group report on dementia 2021, which is a very good report. And there was a large section in there about the impact of non-suitable accommodation on dementia. And therefore, I do wonder if within this strategy, there should be a section about how we could work across the county, the city, etc., to encourage more dementia-friendly accommodation being provided through whichever ways. And it strikes me that all of the councils in Leicestershire are members of a strategic planning group. There may be an opportunity there. But I just think it's something I would urge Cabinet to consider about how best we can look at providing the right accommodation. It's in line with the core strategies of this council about the right accommodation in the right place at the right price. So it goes with our own theme. And I just think we should try and build it into this document if we can, or ask Cabinet rather to consider building it into this document if they can, because I think there is a mechanism where we could look at. It's not going to be an overnight fix, but if we don't start, we'll never get anywhere.
Sure, I'll take your second point first. Yeah, I think including an accommodation related strand within the strategy is definitely something that's achievable. Of course, the City Council has slightly different responsibilities to the counties, as you know, so they can be slightly more elaborate in terms of what they're directly able to influence. We have our own, as you know, arrangements in which we can comment on local plans and planning applications and so on. And I think just being able to describe that in the strategy, since accommodation has such a key link with dementia, it would be an excellent addition to the strategy. Just on your first point about including within the consultation, asking about people's experience of diagnosis, again, yeah, that will be a really, really beneficial addition, particularly, of course, for the county in terms of determining what the barriers might have been to people in their diagnosis journey.
I thank members for it. I thought it was a very good debate, and I think we've put forward some very useful points for Cabinet to consider going forward. I mean, none of them are shattering, but if it makes the strategy better and if it makes the questionnaire better, I think that's what we've been asked to do, and I think we've done that to our best concern, and we look forward to further reports on the progress of this once we've gone a bit down the track. So we're now moving on to agenda item 11, which is an update on the implementation of the Leicestershire and Rutland carers strategy. And again, it's back to John.
Thank you. So this is a timely report. Today being the start of National Carers Week, which is why we wanted to bring a report today for members on an update to the work we've been doing to progress the carers strategy. And members of the committee will recall a couple of reports last year as we developed the strategy and took the strategy through consultation and approval, and the comments that were provided by this committee to that. It's perhaps just before I hand over to Indy, just worth mentioning the event that we held in County Hall this morning. We had a really good event to mark the start and celebrate Carers Week. We had, I think, well over 50 people attend. A range of partners came with information, advice, We had some really good feedback in terms of how the event went. Lots of presentations, a good focus, particularly around mental health and well-being. And we even had a mindfulness session in the council chamber, which I think went down very well. So I'll hand over to Indy now to go through the report.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Chair. So as John said, so the report updates committee on 3 key areas. So one around the progress against the actions that we've had in our carer strategy. There's an appendix around the programme for this week's Carers Week, and also the work that we're planning on doing over the next 12 months. So committee obviously heard about the carer strategy late last year and was signed off at Cabinet in November. And we've got our action plan, which is Leicestershire specific. A few points to go through which aren't necessarily in the report, but over the past year, so from April 22 to March 23, the county, through our partner Basel, identified 1,000 new carers, and speaking to them today, they get about 5 or 6 new carers identified per day. The Young Carers Services reached out to 70, I think it's 72 or 73 carers around supporting young carers and working with schools and colleges. And we've worked with our health partners and Basel again around a hospital discharge service, which is referenced in the report, which supported carers to support their loved ones return home from hospital, allow them to continue to care or to adapt their house or support for them to go home. As I said before, Appendix B talks around Carers Week and the plan there. So there's the event that John alluded to today, and there's a schedule for the next 5 or 6 days around things around the local community. So I'd urge you to look at that as members and look at if there's anything in your local areas to go along and see what's happening. It's really positive. Back to the report. So we've been working on quite a few. It's an LLR strategy. We've got a Leicestershire action plan. So what we're conscious of though is kind of like how we make it more focused towards Leicestershire in our delivery plan to make it more contained. So as we said, we've got our Leicestershire plan and we've just developed, we just set up a multi-agency Leicestershire strategy group, which the first meeting takes place on June the 30th. So that's the county, so our NHS partners, our care and support partners, our vol sector partners, all very specific to Leicestershire. And we're going to use that mechanism to drive our strategy and our action plan. Got a really good commitment when we sent the invite out. So, you know, NHS 100% behind it and our vol sector partners absolutely on the same page. Another point we've got our engagement panel that we've got that's really developed over the past 12 months. That's people with lived experiences across the whole spectrum of disabilities and illnesses. We've got some carers that attend that as well. But what we're going to do is use that as a bit of a springboard to supporting a specific carers forum stroke network as well. So we've got that more strategic approach and working with our carers to get some really good feedback. And we've been linking in with our other services, so carers through our adult learning programme, through Multiply, we're supporting our carers around adult education. Got a dementia strategy and dementia support, which Kate alluded to carers a couple of times in the presentation. We've got some really exciting projects around technology, carers and dementia as well, which is really good. And we're doing more work with our children's colleagues around parent carers and young carers, and it was a key theme that came out today actually from the from our event today. So there's obviously parent carers there, and something around kind of the, I guess, when we say carer, what do we mean? Do we mean all carers? Do we mean adult carers? Do we mean parent carers and young carers? And for me, a carer is a carer, so it should be the whole spectrum. But it's not always as simple as that. You know, appreciate that services are different. So as part of our action plan, if you look at our action plan that we had as part of our strategy, it is an all-encompassing strategy. So it covers all areas. There are some specific parent care actions around special schools, how we look with our SEND and post-16 provisions. So there's a lot there that are very specific, but I think we've got some work to do around actually how we recognise our carers in the county. And that's something we'll be working with. I know Christine's keen on that as well. So to conclude, the report is quite a general update on what we've been doing. But I think it'd be good for us to maybe come back to scrutiny in a few months to see how we've got on with our kind of next stage of our journey. Happy to end there.
Thanks for that, Inderjit. Betty first.
I should, in a sense, I should declare an interest, because when I worked at the university, I was part of Young Carers Research Group. So I did research down. My last piece of research was Southwark. They said they didn't have any young carers. Then 24 hours, I found 12. Well, it's just it's what you look for, basically. So they're often the hidden face of community care, and quite often families, including parents, are quite ashamed that the children are looking after them. They don't like to say that they're carers. So you have to think, you have to work perhaps just that little bit harder to find them. But I am so pleased that you actually acknowledge young carers, but it is hard work digging them out, basically. But the main thing for them is the missing of out an education. That's the hardest thing, because they're at home caring and they're missing out not just an education but also having a life outside the home. But thank you very much for actually picking that one up. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just to come in, so we've got a young carers specific service as well. That children's work with, but they form part of our strategy. But absolutely, I think young carers is a lot of times is that hidden cohort. Like you said, it's education, life, friends, school, it's everything, isn't it, around that potentially that lost bit. So definitely a big one for us.
Bill.
Bit late, but I think I need to declare an interest. My stepdaughter does work at a home with people with learning difficulties. I don't know if that's, but just for the record.
So no question then.
No question.
Leon.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with. First of all, you have done quite good work on this matter. I mean, looking at the report, it's very pleasing. I would like to concentrate actually on the paragraph 25, hospital discharge grant for carers. £2 million there. And there were 138 applications with 49,000, approximately 40,000 for 3 months, January to March. Now, looking at this, I just felt that actually 138 applications is a very small number. Looking actually into the national statistics and projecting the statistics for our area, I would say that we expect a hospitalization number of people in care for Leicestershire approximately 2,250 to 2,500 per year, at least one admission to the hospital. So we're talking about 2,000, more than 2,000 hospitalizations. Right, but we had only 138 applications. This is approximately 6%. And if we look into the money, right, we are talking about £40,000 in 3 months. This makes £160,000 in a year. Out of 2 million, this is 8%. So only 6% of the ones who possibly were eligible for this money had it, and only 8% of this money was spent to this direction. Now, I'm saying this because you see, I work in the NHS, and on a daily basis, I try to discharge patients, but I haven't seen in any of the wards where I go some information about potential funding for people actually to go for this funding and help their relatives to go actually to the community. Thank you.
I'll start with this one. Fair point. So the reference to the £2 million in December, around about the 16th of December, if I remember correctly, we were notified that there was the discharge grant available, the winter discharge grant. We didn't get the notification until the 16th of December, and it had to be spent by the 30th of March. So we put a whole host of schemes in place in order to spend that money. One of those schemes was the carers discharge grant. It was something we'd never done before. It's something that I'm not aware is done. It's not a scheme that is sort of recognised nationally. So it was quite innovative in the way that we tried to do it. we effectively had 10 weeks from the middle of January to the end of March. That's all we had. So communication was limited. We did get some information out, particularly into the Royal Infirmary and into Glenfield. We didn't really get much information beyond that, to be fair. We think that the scheme was hugely successful in that period, in that 10-week period. So we got 138 applications in. We identified nearly 100 new carers that we didn't know about before. And we had over 100 carers approach us and say they wanted more information, more advice from us. So in terms of reach, it did exactly what we wanted it to do. And it was a pilot, and the money ran out at the end of March. We have now been awarded further funding, and we've got a 2-year funding from this April. And we are working to put this scheme back in place for at least that 2-year period using the additional funding we've got. We know that take-up of this will grow and grow and grow. We've already had some conversations we have an evaluation report, and we're very happy to share the evaluation report with committee members if that's helpful from the first 10 weeks. We've spoken to carers. Indy mentioned the engagement group earlier, and we took a report to the engagement group a couple of weeks ago, and got lots of feedback from carers in terms of what's helpful, what's not helpful, where's the information. As you said, you haven't seen any information on the wards. We need to make sure that the information is not just on the wards, but actually the ward staff are aware of the scheme and can promote the scheme, because clearly that's the first point of call for most carers if they're visiting people in hospital wards. So we're very pleased with the take-up that we got, and we think it will grow exponentially. We think it'll be much more than 160. You know, if as you say, 40,000 is 10 weeks, 160. That we think it'll be much bigger than that actually.
You have that, Leon, or did you want to come back? Barry.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to pick up on the same subject, but before I do that, I attended this morning's meeting all the way through, and I thought it was excellent, and learned a lot, and how many different partners we've got and how that all comes together. And I can see, and it's funny, from sitting on this committee for 2 years, and I know Christine mentioned it herself that she learned stuff herself. There's obviously more we need to do to make sure everyone's aware of all the different things that we've got. But it was excellent, and I think if we run that, do you run it every year or?
So Carers Week is every year.
Yeah.
I'm not too sure if we've run. It's my first year in Carers Week in Leicestershire, but I'm not sure if we've done that before.
But I thought what we did was very good, and also you got the different bodies all talking to each other as well, and I think it really joined everything up. And I think it's something you should probably do repeat it annually, because I think it was a good way of getting people together, etc. It was excellent. Coming back to this discharge grant. What was interesting, my father went into hospital in March. Obviously, this only ran from 25th January to 31st of March. He was in Kettering. He was in there during this period, and there certainly was nothing around the wards. And I know from this morning's, we're saying there's disconnect with outside of counting, so obviously there's stuff to be done there. But the one thing I would say is that you really, if we going forward, we're going to be doing this. One of the places to make sure that it's put into is through the heart team, because that re-enablement team are probably the people that contact the most, especially with carers that need the help because of the re-enablement. There's obviously a big need, and the pack of papers that come when the heart team start, etc., or the heart team leader when you have your first chat with them, etc., that would be a really important place to get this information out, because they are the people that are going to need that help the most. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. And they are linked in, like definitely linked in. But I think moving forward, if we're going to kind of crack on with it as a 2-year piece, as a massive kind of rollout around actually how we get the message out. So yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah, and thank you for your comments around the event.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My point is, there's been a lot recently about young carers. And obviously, there's a lot of young carers who are probably still not on the system, and we know nothing about them. would it be worth doing something working within the schools, even if it was just leaflets, to try and target those young carers who are probably doing a lot more than they realise, and it could be affecting their education and everything. I do know one myself who does it. Would that be something we could think about doing regarding this?
So yeah, so absolutely. So our young carers service works with schools, is in and out of schools, has like support groups, works with our Basel partners as well. So yeah, no, it's absolutely a great point. But it is something that it needs to be kind of embedded into you've got young carers service, but how embedded is the young carers, I guess, thought process in the actual school, head teacher, the teachers, etc. So there's still a lot of work to do. But yeah, that is absolutely happening.
Yeah, let's come back on. I mean, that's because you could work probably with the governors and stuff at the school to probably get that more over with there. Might be an idea.
Other questions? Well, thank you all. I think it's clear that I think there's a resounding thumbs up for this morning. I think from people involved, and it's pleasing that a member of this committee was able to go as well. So again, I think it perhaps gives you a way forward that this is something that could grow if it was felt worthwhile considering, which I think the view from this committee would be the case. There's an ongoing theme on communications, which comes back to the point we made on the previous report. Might be worth actually us talking to the scrutiny commissioners about whether or not some sort of workshop or something, just to make sure members are aware of all the routes that we're currently using as a council, because obviously, some people have seen what goes into schools, some haven't, and that sort of thing. And perhaps we're not fully aware of councillors as we should be of what communication we're doing elsewhere, which is again wider than this committee. So I'll take that up as chairman of this committee with our scrutiny commissioner. I know you probably will through yours as well. So I think it's been hopefully some very useful feedback from you there. But I said we've ever since I've chaired this committee, in fact, been on it, I think the work we've done for carers has just grown and grown and grown and got better and better and better. And it's great to see this is something that we. People always say you do things short term. Well, we've never done this short term. We build on it each year, and I think it's just great to see. And I think it's hopefully reassurance to any members of the public watching out there. Hopefully they can pass the message on, knowing this is what Leicestershire County Council want to continue doing and building upon as we go forward. So thank you for that. And thank you very much, Inderjit, as well for that report. We're now on to agenda item 12, which is the performance report for 2022-23, the position as at March 23, which is with Matt Williams. Now, with the agreement of the committee, it just strikes me that rather than Matt bobbing backwards and forwards, would members of the committee be happy if we took agenda item 12 followed by agenda item 14 and then come back to agenda item 13, because there are some points in agenda item 14 which will relate on agenda item 12, and it would seem sensible to consider them both at the same time, and then Matt not have to repeat himself, because I think agenda item 14 will change going forward agenda item 12, and it may be you might even want to take both at the same time or mention one or two. So we can go through them separately, but you can be as flexible as you like going between the two. Put it that way, Matt.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for that option with the item ordering on the agenda. Good afternoon, everybody. So yes, you do have two reports from myself today. The first is the usual report that I bring, which is around the performance of the department. And this report covers the period 2022-23, so it's the fourth of those that I bring. A couple of points just before we get into the detail. These figures are classed as provisional at this stage. They won't in reality change a great deal if at all, but the final figures will be published by NHS England in the autumn, around about October time. And what I usually do then is bring a kind of a comparative benchmarked report back to the Scrutiny Committee after that. With that in mind, then I'll start with adult social care side of the department. On paragraph 8, it looks at the new contacts made with the authority in 22-23, and we find that there were 29,000 during the year, and that's actually a 2% increase on the previous year. of which 14% I think is worth mentioning resulted in a long-term service. And this is a small increase, about 1 percentage point higher than the previous year. And we can see that with other service-based analysis we undertake, where we can see there's an increase in number of people receiving a service. The following paragraph, paragraph 9, highlights the continued high level of performance in relation to people with learning disabilities. We focus on that again through the national framework via people living in a settled accommodation or people in employment. Leicestershire's performance on both of those is higher than national average, and we've maintained that high level through 22-23. Moving on to the provision of re-ablement services to support people regain those life skills that help them to live at home. Paragraphs 10 and 11 pick this up. So there's 2 metrics in the Adult Social Care Outcomes Framework. One of those looks at people who have no need for ongoing services following some re-ablement service. We were very high in 21-22, we're at 90%. That's fallen slightly. I think it's fallen to about 87% in 22-23, but still substantially higher than the national average. The second indicator that we have within the framework around re-ablements, it relates to those people who have been discharged from hospital, have gone through re-ablements and are now living at home 3 months later, or 91 days. That performance has remained, I think it may have remained exactly the same actually between the 2 years, but it remained very similar. And again, that is considerably higher than the national average and in a good position. Moving on to paragraph 12, we look at admissions into permanent residential or nursing care. For those aged 18 to 64, we've seen a substantial jump during the year. Now, this was something to be expected. There was a focus through reviews on people who were recorded on the system as being in a temporary placement, perhaps that's how it was when they originally went in. They've been reviewed. We've seen those numbers being classed as permanent move from 25 up to 46 through the year. I think that may still actually fall slightly below national average when the figures come out. There's a chance that is. So whilst we've seen a considerable increase, we still potentially may be lower than the national average, which, as you imagine, that's where we want to be in terms of admitting people into permanent care. For those people aged over 65 or over, we've seen a small reduction during the year. We had 886 admissions in the previous year. That was down at 841 in 22-23. I think that may still remain slightly above the national average. So again, still a bit of work that can be done to improve around the number of admissions. I'd just like to move on to the survey, the annual survey that we undertake. It's often when I come here, it's certainly one of the more challenging areas within the framework that we deal with. So within the framework, we've got about 25 metrics. That's going to change, and that'll be in my second paper shortly. But half of those are kind of sourced from surveys. And as I said, it's often an area we've fallen below national averages. However, in 22-23, we've seen some significant improvement on some of those key metrics coming through from that survey. The first of those is finding information. So this is the proportion of people who find it easy to find information. That's improved from 57% up to 62%. And also people who said that services help them to feel safe. And for that, it's moved up from 81 to 85%. Doesn't appear to be huge jumps when you see that in a percentage terms, but with statistical calculation, that is a significant improvement. For those who say they have enough social contact, that stayed roughly the same. I think it's around 37, 38%. I think these still may come in at best around national average, perhaps a bit lower. So while we've seen good improvement in Leicestershire, there's scope there to take that further in subsequent years. Just to finish off then on the adult social care side of the department, paragraphs 15 and 16 cover both safeguarding and reviews. In terms of safeguarding, we've seen a reduction in activity in 22-23, primarily driven by a 9% reduction in alerts coming to the authority. Probably needs looking at in a bit more detail, and maybe that 21-22 was slightly low, was slightly higher. That's something I could go back and have a look at. But certainly in 22-23, we did see this reduction in alerts. And that will have partly driven on a reduction in the number of inquiries taking place as well. For reviews, we look at people who've been receiving a service for 12 months or more and where they're reviewed during that 12-month period. We've been a strong performer in this area for a few years. The national average is 55%, and in 21-22 we were at 69%. That improved notably through 22-23, and 76%, just over 3/4 of people, were reviewed within the 12 months. I'll move on to the communities and wellbeing side of the departments, and that starts on paragraph 18 and picks up with the visits to heritage sites. Now, I think it's worth pointing out that running through that last part of the report, again, we compare to the previous year, so it's 21-22 we're reporting against. That was still finding the effects of some of the COVID restrictions at the start of that year. I think some of that might have gone on to the late summer of 2021. So you're going to see some pretty strong improvements in activity around communities and wellbeing, but just bear in mind where we were coming from in a sense. So with that in mind, heritage on paragraph 18 saw a 31% increase in the number of visitors to sites. And when we combine that with website visits, with which we do, we totaled over 300,000, and that surpassed the target for the year. It's going to be a similar picture as I just noted for other aspects of the service. So libraries also saw a considerable increase in footfall, 54% in physical visitors and 20% increase in website visits. And again, combining those met the target for the year. With greater access to heritage sites, to libraries, etc., the opportunity to volunteering was higher, and we saw over 7,000 hours more during 22-23 than the previous year. So with libraries being open more and a great deal more footfall coming through, as you would imagine, the number of loans increased during the year. Paragraph 20 sort of highlights where that is. So we saw a 21% increase in junior loans. We saw a 7% increase in e-loans, electronic loans, and overall we saw an increase in 14%. The final paragraph 22, touches on the adult learning service, and I think you'll have a report later today in a bit more detail around adult learning performance. But in terms of people achieving their learning aims, and just to bear in mind the report looks at the end of March, we've got to bear in mind that adult learning is an academic year, so it's partway through that year, not like the other side of things I've spoken about, which is year end. However, at that point, 88% have been achieving their learning aims against a local target of 86%, so just above where we'd like to be. But I think just to summarise then for 22-23, I think it's been a reasonably successful year on the whole. We've touched on some of those strong areas around learning disability support, around our reablement, and also around permanent admissions. It was encouraging to see some of those survey results come back. Gives us plenty of room for further improvement, but at least the trajectory has changed in direction. I think possibly one of the areas that we will be keeping an eye on for sure is where I started the report, those new contacts coming into the department and those going on to get a service. We are doing some work around demand management at the moment to get into a bit more detail of that. That's it, thank you, Chair. So I'm happy to take any comments.
Thanks very much, Matt. So Barry first.
Thank you, Chair. There's a small line in this which looks fairly innocuous, but when you've actually just gone through the situation I have with my father being admitted to hospital, really has a lot of clarity. So now on paragraph 24, and it says the proportion of people whose contact with the department leads to a service, primarily home care, remains a concern. And further analysis is being undertaken to understand this trend in more detail. My father was admitted to hospital with he had sepsis, it turns out. He had a medical fall waiting for the ambulance. He was in Kettering Hospital for 3 weeks. They left him lying in a bed for 3 weeks. The lavatory was no further than that door. There was a nurse there the whole time before people. It wasn't a lack of staff, it wasn't a lack of funding. It was just that's how they operated. He was released. We were given about 12 hours notice that he was being released. I spoke to every single member of staff I saw each day in the 3 weeks I went to visit, trying to explain his situation, his baseline, the fact that he would be up on his own, doing his own food, doing everything himself. And we just needed some OTs, some occupational therapy to bring him back up so that when he came back to us, he'd be able to be slightly mobile, etc., that kind of thing. Not at once, at any time, did anybody write anything down to actually take any information about the baseline, what he should be able to achieve. They said, oh, we probably need a care plan, but that's Leicester, because we're living in Harborough, so that's Leicester, so therefore they don't tend to connect too well, but we'll see what we can do. And he was released. Our heart team, the re-enablement team, came in on that evening, and our team leader said that she had had no previous information from Kettering as to what his condition was. No equipment was available, was in place for him to help him out. Through the heart team and Medicare, they were absolutely fantastic. I cannot fault the service that we're providing. Every single member that came in for 3 weeks, every morning, to help get him up and get him re-enabled, helping us learn what we needed to do to help get him. But he came back a zombie. He was unable to, he had no muscle strength at all. He'd lost all his cognitive abilities, everything. And that was created, Chair, just laying in bed in the NHS. Not because there was a funding problem, not because there was a staffing problem. So no rose-tinted glasses thinking that our NHS is fantastic and it just needs more funding. It was just the way they operated. The heart team asked more questions on the first evening they came in as to what's his baseline, what's he capable of, what can we get him back to, than anyone had asked at the hospital the whole time. So when we look at this and we are trying to analyse and understand why are we producing more care in the home, it's because our NHS is producing a problem that it is then dumping onto us. And it's only through this experience, and I spoke to every single heart member team, I spoke to the district nurses, our doctor, the occupational therapists, a number of our own officers. I've spoken to most of the people that were here this morning because I wanted to get a feel. There was not a single person that thought the system was running any differently. So the question is this: we're here as an upper tier authority. How do we push back on the NHS and make them do their job and stop them from releasing back into, I mean, and bearing in mind, he's living with us. We converted our house with an annex. He's got his own place. So my wife and I are there to both care. Imagine sending him back where he was living on his own, or with an elderly wife or husband where they're not able to help out. I was absolutely disgusted with the way that it panned out. And I was amazed by how well we came in and took that over. And when we wonder how our budgets are short to pay for other departments, etc., the reason is because we're spending money we shouldn't be spending. It should be the NHS should have been getting him up a week before and making all that to walk him around. And the OT guys I spoke to, 2 of them came in for an hour and a half to help him get back onto his feet, work out what equipment. And I said, why aren't you in the wards doing any of this? They said, oh, well, it's too busy, we haven't got time. I said, but if the 2 of you were in a ward for an hour and a half, you could have helped 20 people out. Instead, I've got 2 of you doing a home visit to come and just get 1 person back up and running, and all you need to do. So when you come to do your analysis, when you need to understand, and if you want to sit down with me and go over more detail, because it's not until you go through this that you really start to understand the problems. But the problem is the way the NHS is dealing with this and the sheer lack of information. No one cared, no one was interested in what I could tell them so that they understood who he was and what he should have got back to. It's the best report I could find because of that line in there, Chair, that I could actually raise this.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thanks, Barry. I think there's a personal issue there, but I mean, obviously, a general question amongst it. I don't know if anyone, particularly John, might like to comment on interaction with the NHS. And in fact, just from my personal view, of how do we actually talk to hospitals outside our borders? And do they notify us that our residents are there? I mean, I don't even know these things.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, personal stories are always powerful, I think, and a good way of getting to the bottom of issues and looking for opportunities to improve. I think there's a number of issues. I mean, it's a very complex. It's a very simple question. It's a very complicated answer. So one of the issues, of course, that we've got at the moment is, and particularly since the pandemic, is the sheer number of people who are waiting for treatment, and the demand on the NHS is intense, it has to be said. And the NHS therefore need to be as efficient as possible, but you would also want them to be as effective as possible. but they need to free up beds, and they need to turn the beds over very quickly in order to treat the next person who is, because, you know. So one of the things that we're trying to do as a whole system across health and social care is to look at, well, what's that treatment pathway? I absolutely take the point that you make about, wouldn't it be better just to make sure that people don't deteriorate whilst they're in hospital? That's the first point. But in order to do that, people would need probably to spend longer in that hospital bed, which is what they used to do. But spending longer in that hospital bed does mean then that the next person who's waiting for treatment is going to be waiting longer. So one of the things that we are looking to do is to work collaboratively with the NHS. And the NHS are funding the local authority to expand its reablement service considerably. So at the moment, we have a selective kind of model of reablement. So we will go in and we'll talk to people like yourselves, and we'll look at whether or not the person has what we think is reablement potential. So can we get people back to the baseline? Can we make an improvement or not? And it's a kind of a selective process. And the problem with that is that 20% of people who come out of hospital go straight on to long-term home care without the opportunity of reablement, because we don't have sufficient reablement services for everybody who's coming out of hospital. So the NHS are funding the local authority, the county council, to expand its reablement service so that everybody who comes out of hospital gets an opportunity for reablement. And that way, we get people back to where they're able to function effectively. And we don't have a dependency on long-term home care for people who don't need it, which is costing the local authority quite a lot of money at the moment. So it is kind of working as a system. Now you will say, well, that's after the horse has bolted. We are also, we have been undertaking some pilots looking at whether or not we can go into, and this isn't particularly in terms of the acute, this is more in terms of community hospitals, but looking at whether we could get into those hospitals and work more effectively before the person is discharged. That's really difficult to do in a big acute hospital. That is, you know, with the sort of the fast pace and of treatment in a big acute hospital, that's quite difficult to do. But in a community hospital, it should be reasonable. There is always, it's always harder with hospitals outside of Leicestershire. And it shouldn't be. I accept it shouldn't matter where you go into a hospital. But we don't tend to have people on site in the out-of-county hospitals in the same way that we do with the in-county hospitals, simply because we haven't got the resource to have people on site in every hospital. And we have link workers. So it should, I mean, to be fair, the people in Kettering should have contacted us prior to discharge, and they should have passed all that information to us. And if they'd done that in a timely way, we would have had a link worker that would have gone into Kettering and would have met with you and your family. So maybe there's some communication we need to do there with Kettering. Certainly, it works better with some hospitals than others. So I would say, for example, and the name of it's just gone straight out of my head. But people who live in Hinckley tend to veer towards the hospital whose name escapes me. But we do have a good relationship on the west of the county. Particularly with Derby and Burton and with Nuneaton. But yeah, it does vary. But they should, I mean, the discharge process should be that they contact the local authority ahead of discharge to enable us to make contact. They obviously didn't in that particular case, but it is an issue. And our view, and you know, is that if you go into hospital for medical treatment, and part of that treatment is a recovery period, then that should be part of the whole NHS treatment pathway. It shouldn't be seen as separate. It should be part of the pathway. The recovery is just as important as the treatment itself. So that's the view that we take.
I can just come back, Chair. And I think that's the problem. As you say, yes, it is personal, but it's only when you go through this that you start to see where things fail. And I think the concern is that, you know, we can see what the issue is, but it's how we are able to use the power that we've got to be able to push that? Or does this have to go further? Is this just down to ministers? I mean, my local MP is a health minister, and I can quite happily have a chat with him to push things. I just see, you know, we get into this to make a change in people's lives. And when we see something happening ourselves, we understand it. You think, well, how do we change that? Because there's some really simple stuff that needed to be done that would have actually changed the whole outcome.
Just George Eliot was the hospital trying to get me.
Funny enough, I just remembered the name myself. just on a point before I pass over to Betty is when our staff therefore visit somebody like Barry's father and realise they've had no information from, in this case, wherever it was, Kettering, do they actually let the department know so that people Kettering can be contacted to say, why did this not happen? So do we record those instances and follow them up?
I'd like to say yes, but I'd have to check.
It was just a thought that occurred to me, Betty.
I think mine's much more of a positive comment. A number of years ago, when Haven, which is on my patch, is the smallest library in the county, and they were going to close it down because there wasn't any funding. And thankfully, Haven Parish Council stepped in to help with the funding to keep the library open. And it's only one little building, but it's like a community hub because they allow councillors to hold surgeries, they allow the police to go in. But I just wanted to say that it's a positive example of a very small community hub, and I'm thankful that we've had the opportunity to work with the parish council to keep that little hub open. I just wanted to say something positive. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Betty. Bill?
Yes, sir. Page 75, item 16. Care Act 2014, statutory guidance. Council should undertake a review of care plans no later than every 12 months. It's not a legal duty. That's a bit of a mixture in terms, isn't it? Has any case law on that? Has anybody actually been, challenged about not reviewing care plans every 12 months? Statutory guidance means it should be done. So if something goes wrong and you end up in court, what defence have you got? Is there case law on this?
Okay, two things. Yes, the report just said this is not a legal duty. Actually, given that it's statutory guidance, it probably is. So when we previously brought a report back to committee last year around people waiting for assessment and waiting for review, I think we were within that report we were outlining the fact that there is within the Care Act there is no time limit for an assessment to take place. There's no defined time limit, but there is a time limit for reviews. So for reviews, a person should have a review within every 12 months. Is there a case law? Not to my knowledge, no. I don't think that has ever been tested in the courts. Yes, that's never been the absolutely. But I think, as it says in the report, the fact that we have 76%, and that means that clearly 24% of people are not getting that review within 12 months, but the national average is 55%. So we are considerably above the national average. And I think that's something that we should be proud of, but we should obviously aim to achieve more.
I'm commenting that, Chair, that working towards 100%, so it produces evidence if it end up in court.
I think we have had, as John says, papers on this before, and I think one of the issues is literally finding enough people to do all of this, which is everyone struggling with. So we have documented it. I think it will appear in the minutes here that obviously John's comments, etc. So it will be documented. So on that basis, but it is something. I know you're not a regular member of this committee. We have discussed at length before, and John has been looking for ways to improve the percentages. It's that, ever thus line, isn't it? If you had enough people, you could do it all. You probably have too many people if you were completely up to date. So it's a quid pro quo, but we take your point, and it's something the committee have been concerned with and will, I'm sure, no doubt discuss on many further occasions. But I know Christine wants to comment on this as well before perhaps you come back, Bill.
But it wasn't on that part. It was on to do with the museums and libraries, how well they're doing. And in fact, at the last lead members meeting, didn't it, came up. And I think it's because the libraries and the museums are doing a lot of innovative, anyway, you know what I mean, work there. And in some cases, we're getting more people now through the doors than we did before COVID. So John and I did do a letter thanking all the work that the library and the museum staff had done. And I go around as often as I can to see these exhibitions that they put on. And there's some of them very interesting. And I know, taking on board what you said, we do support the community libraries as well. Thank you.
So I shall come back to Bill because I think you wanted to come back again.
Just these days of litigation, Chair, I'm just concerned that in this report, we've got one comment. In reality, it's perhaps not quite accurate. And can we just
I
put
think
something somewhere that actually...
I think the minutes will reflect that John's comments about it probably is a legal duty. I'm sure it's being captured. And that obviously, you know, it is something we are aware of and this committee has discussed before and is aware of. And, you know, John is ever looking for ways to improve the service. But again, I think, you know, we have got to consider the last point he made about how good we are compared to others. And, you know, it would always be good to be 100%, but if we're kicking above the others, it shows that every authority across the country has got similar problems, but we are actually raising our game beyond those. So I take your point, it will be fully minuted. And hopefully when we all appear in court, that'll be our defence. Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, mine is on the same point there about obviously the 24% we've not got. And I just wonder how many of those 24, because I used to be in the care sector as a foster care for City Council, were people who actually, in fact, refused to have the reports done or weren't available for the reports, because that could be a significant number, especially when it's children with disabilities and other things who just will refuse to turn up to have their care reports done. So that might be a more interesting figure that might be more interesting to have on there of how many refusing or being able to do it because of X, Y, or Z. Might be a reason. I don't know what you think of that. Sorry.
We're just checking whether we'd actually be able to know that. Certainly not off data that's able to be extracted and aggregated by myself. You may be able to do some audits of review files perhaps to understand that. We know of the 24% when it was due and how long it is till the next one, etc. But whether they turn up or are involved, etc., is not something we would necessarily capture.
You've been given an easy run here, Matt, on this report. So I'm going to ask you a question before we go on to the next one. We talked about this before, the percentage of service use for social contact as much as they would like. And one of the issues we've had and we've debated endlessly is the amount of money we have to enable that to happen compared to other authorities. Now, bearing in mind, we're not that far off the average for the country. I think we're, what, 38.7 against 40.6. Do we have any statistical data that shows how we compare per pound spent against others? Because that would be quite interesting, because if somebody's throwing twice what we are at this, but they're only hitting 40.6%, we could save them a fortune by showing them how we do it better. They could give us a bit of their money and we could all be at the same percentage. Yeah, but that's the question.
As far as I'm aware, there's no funding line about funding towards this this kind of thing about the social contact side. You could compare perhaps overall expenditure against survey responses, but I do that with quite a bit of caution.
It was worth a try. Thank you for that, Matt. And if we can go straight into 14, and if you're able, and John was telling us earlier that the chair's briefing that it's early days on this, but if you can give us a feel for how what we see might change and what advantages and disadvantages you see in it would be extremely useful. As I said to John this morning, I've read the report 3 times and I will profess I don't understand it, so I'm hoping you're going to put it in English for me.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a very detailed report and there's a lot in there. They've packed a lot into this roadmap, which is going forward for about 5 years to 2028. and perhaps it just shows the depth and breadth of the work that goes on behind the kind of statistics that we bring to such committees as this, really. So it is the Care Data Matters roadmap. It was launched in February by the Department of Health and Social Care. It's come off the back of a number of policy documents and acts. The white paper, People at the Heart of Care, certainly touched on a vision for data and information and kind of the digitalisation of that. Subsequently, there was a Data Saves Lives policy paper last year, and that talked about reshaping health and social care with data. I think they learned a lot through the pandemic. They learned a lot about how data does actually help considerably, and perhaps where there are gaps and where they do need to improve that. Local authorities do have quite a different reporting regime, perhaps to the NHS services, and perhaps they saw some change there that needed to be bridged. So that was kind of where they were wanting to go to. They've worked quite closely. The Department of Health and Social Care have worked very closely over the last couple of years with stakeholders such as the Local Government Association, Association of Directors of Social Services. And through that work, they were able to identify some of the issues, and they are listed on paragraph 12, they're bulleted there, so those key issues. So they certainly talk about digitalisation, availability, duplication. An interesting one in the penultimate bullet point in 12 is a lack of standardisation. And then gaps, which I think the pandemic was the key driver in understanding those gaps. So working over the last couple of years with those stakeholders, some key kind of themes emerged as outlined in paragraph 13. Perhaps obvious, I don't know, but population characteristics, quality of care and support, commissioning, the markets. Interesting one, unpaid carers, and we'll come back to that in a moment. And then, as you possibly would imagine, contingency planning around infectious disease and control measures around that. There's an appendix. Appendix A gives a flavour for what that roadmap is going to look like over the next sort of 5 years. There's a lot in there. Some of the key themes, I won't go through it, you'll be thankful to know, but just to touch on those kind of 4 key aspects of this roadmap. We're looking at streamlining and improving data collection. We're looking at bridging gaps where we know there are gaps in that data. Access to data and the insights that gives us is in need of improvement. And finally, they're talking about digitalising social care. So, as noted at the start, and very self-chair, there's a lot that they've packed into one roadmap, really. It is a thorough look at the way we collect data, provide data, and then use it when it comes back. So there are a number of aspects, and if we move on to paragraph 15 in the report, and running from paragraph 15 through to probably about paragraph 20, are specific details then of what this roadmap entails. For providers, there's 2 key issues here. So these can be providers, whether it be residential care, nursing care, home care providers. They've been using a platform for a number of years now called the Capacity Tracker to collect and provide information direct to the Department of Health and Social Care. It doesn't come through the local authority, it's straight to NHS England, I think. 2 angles on that the government wants to look at is what that data set involves, and can we make that standardised and a minimum size or a minimum data set that they need to provide. And secondly, how will that data reach central government? They're talking about what's called a digital social care record, and they're saying that at the moment around about 50% of providers do have a social care record that is digitalised. They want to move to 80% by next year and 100% by 2028. So they're looking at, by digitalising that data flow, they're hoping it's going to reduce the burden on providers. Clearly, this needs to be looked at in more detail, and perhaps just what the roadmap is suggesting at the start. I would say it's paragraph 17 that is a real key one for the local authority in Leicestershire in our case. And this is something called the client level data. At the moment, when I bring the performance report, like I did a few moments ago, we talked about metrics, we talked about percentage of this, percentage of that. Sitting behind that is a considerable amount of data that flows from local authorities to NHS England. Now, at the moment, that happens on an annual basis. So my team at the end of each year in May will collate data, they will aggregate it, and they will send that off to NHS England. A considerable change is now taking place. We are moving away from that annual aggregated approach to a quarterly one, so 4 times a year. And instead of the local authority actually aggregating that data and punching it into an Excel spreadsheet, perhaps, we are merely going to shift that data at row level straight from the case management system that social workers record on, and we're going to push that straight through to NHS England. We're talking tens of thousands of records on a quarterly basis. It will cover the same themes that we do now. So we're talking about the contacts. So we talked earlier about contacts being higher. So we'll talk about contacts, assessments, services, reviews, and carers. So the amount of information or the coverage of that information is going to be equivalent to what we do at the moment, but it's going to be in a lot more detail. One of the key improvements that that's going to bring is our ability to, with the NHS, to actually merge these data sets together. It may come as a surprise, but at the moment we can't do that. We can't say that Fred Broggs has been through hospital and this is his social care journey and bring those two items of data together. This new approach, albeit it's going to be complex and a lot of work to do, but it is going to enable us to be able to do that. So that's a real big area for the local authority, and that, as I said, that's already underway. Our first quarterly return will be made in July this year. Paragraph 18 touches on the mandatory surveys. So we had a few metrics earlier sourced from the survey. They want to revamp those surveys. As yet, we don't know quite what detail that will involve, whether it will be these questions that we asked, or it may also include how we deliver that survey. At the moment, it's a postal questionnaire, whether they're going to try and change them or enable more electronic responses. These are the questions I'm sure government will be looking at. But from 2025, we're expecting quite big changes in that area. Interestingly, as well, in that last sentence there on paragraph 18, is a feasibility study into unpaid carers. So at the moment, when we only do a survey of carers every other year, but they are carers known to us. And we talked earlier, I think, through the event or the grants through the early part of this year, we found more carers coming forward to us. But it is only those carers that we survey, those known to the council. So the government are looking into ways that we can survey people who are out there providing unpaid care, and that we can try and track their kind of feedback through a survey, but not necessarily those that are known to us. So some changes there as well. It's going to be interesting how that changes. Paragraph 19 looks at the performance framework, which is what drives a lot of the performance report we bring here on a quarterly basis. I think it's on Appendix B. It's moved into 6 key objectives. Looks a little light maybe at the moment because they're doing it in 2 phases. So what you see at the moment is pretty much everything that's there now. There's a few extras. We've got a new metric this year on Care Quality Commission ratings. So that's not something we've had before. So we'll be looking at a portion with high level ratings. But then phase 2 coming in a couple of years, I think will beef out the performance framework for adult social care. We'll see a lot more indicators come in, and maybe that interface between the NHS and social care provision will be one of those key items within that. Finally, on paragraph 20, something we're well aware of is the Care Quality Commission's new duty to kind of assess local authority social care provision. They'll clearly be wanting to use a data set that enables them to compare Leicestershire to Nottinghamshire, whoever, and getting that data set right is key. So the Care Quality Commission will have quite a vested view on where this development of this roadmap goes over the next few years. Finally, at the end of the report, we talk about some feedback. So Department of Health and Social Care have given us till the end of July as an option to feedback. It's pretty open, the feedback. You don't have to be a local authority. Anybody can go in. It's slightly difficult to work your way through the feedback form. I've tried to make the best of that I can in Appendix C. It basically looks at those themes that we've listed on paragraph 13 that ADAS and LGA and others came up with, and then various stakeholders who would have a view. So it might be local authorities, it might be people who use social care services, and what their views might be. Key comments so far, we haven't actually provided yet our feedback yet, but key aspects, as you might imagine, is trying to understand and get data and information on those wider determinants affecting why people may have social care needs. So we're talking about things like housing, deprivation, economic kind of challenges, perhaps health and other further demographics. And then also the market side of the provision of social care. So we know very little about self-funders. It's not something we collect data or hold data on. So that's a key area where I think local authorities and other stakeholders will be keen to kind of understand. Other market determinants such as new provider entrants and new people coming into the market, and the direct payments market is again an area where I think we could boost our understanding through data. Final part on that, paragraph 24, social care workforce. There is a data return already that goes to government, but I don't think it's one of their best. That could be improved considerably. So turnover of staff, availability, again, thinking about unpaid carers and how their work within an authority supports people. And these are some of the key aspects that are coming out in the feedback that, as I said, we will certainly be providing by the deadline of the 31st of July. I think in conclusion, and there's, as we agreed at the start, there's a lot in there. I think it's useful that they brought it all together at one time. I think if they'd have separated this out over a longer period, there wouldn't, these things are interconnected. We can't just do one then the next. So they do need to bring them together. It does make a bigger piece of work. I think the benefits will outweigh the burdens. There will be a burden. There's certainly going to be a burden this year. We are going to, from a local authority perspective, we need to provide this new row level data, the client level data that I mentioned, but we'll also still be having to do our annual returns, our aggregator returns. So there's a bit of an overlap, a transition. It's useful to do because we want to see how good the quality is and how confident the Department of Health and Social Care are moving of letting that one go and taking us on the new journey. So there's a bit of a year or so of overlap. But again, as I said, I think in general, the positivity and the benefits do outweigh this burden. Within my team, within our service area, we've already started working with the CSU in the NHS to look at ways of bringing this data together, as I said, and to start firing some questions at it, just trying to understand where we can take our analysis in the years to come, really. So yeah, I think it's a great roadmap. It's going to be a challenge, but interesting. And I think put us in a different place in 5 years to where we are now, and certainly to where we were during that pandemic 3 years ago. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for that, Matt. Before you call in, Betty, I think Leon needs to leave to go to an urgent meeting. So thanks for your contributions today, Leon. Just before I call Betty, just for clarification on that last bit you said, does it mean that we will have access to exactly the same data as the NHS or wherever it goes? So will we all be able to see the same thing, or is that something you don't know yet?
We won't be able to see NHS data, but they will have access to ours, and we work with them. It's all synonymized, so we don't know patients' names or dates of birth, etc. But we'll be working closely. It will pull together a much better cohesion between health analytics and local authority analytics. As I said, we've started that already. So we will have direct access to. They have a myriad of data sets. But we will be able to work with them and their knowledge and understanding. I think that's a key part here. Is I could make quite a lot of mistakes with health data. It's not my area, and vice versa. So it really does bring the right people together, I think, in the room.
Betty?
I think with this one, you're really in between a rock and a hard place in many ways, because it only covers the carers that are known to authority in a sense, but there's a number of sort of different range of hidden carers, and very hard to know who they are, how you access them. You have your self-funders as well, and I just wondered to do the research into finding out the unpaid carers would cost an awful lot of money. But the worry is that there are people out there who need help and who absolutely don't even know how to go about asking for that help. And I know the authority does the best it can in trying to do that, but you're never ever going to really reach many of those who actually need the help more. some people are really good at saying what their needs are. Others are ashamed that they're actually caring when they shouldn't be. So there's a real issue there of how you access some of those who have quite high needs. Thank you, Chair. It's just a comment more than anything else.
Thanks for that, Betty, and thanks. I don't think there's any further question, mate. Thanks for the overview. We look forward to that report of several thousand lines of data that we're going to have to pour over. I think we might need to book a week out. So if I'm right, we will carry on seeing similar reports for the next year before they change. So when will we see a change in reporting?
So for we're now into 23-24. The reports you'll receive this year are going to be very similar to what you've had say today. We do have a couple of extra new metrics in there. As I said, there's the CQC rating was one that we need to look at how we can get at that data. I think the safeguarding one changes slightly. So you may see small changes, but nothing particular. But another couple of years, yes, the report could be twice the size.
Thanks very much, and I think hopefully it helped. I think everybody having those two reports together. We're now going back to agenda item 13, which is the Leicestershire Adult Learning Service Performance and Accountability Statement. And it's with John Intergit, and we've also been joined by, we are now joined by Paul Fleming, who's been left with presenting a report, but I don't know if John's doing the introductions or we're going straight to Paul. Straight to Paul.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, all. Yeah, this is the report for the performance of the Adult Learning Service. It covers our current position on the performance and also the accountability statement. So there's two sections to the report. I think it's 12 months since we reported previously. So the first section just covers it's a useful reminder around the policy framework. Adult learning is a cross-cutting theme and supports a number of the different council strategies. The service programmes support people primarily with their basic skills, so English, maths and digital, but there are also a range of other programmes that support mental health, well-being, and the curriculum aligns to the Adults and Communities strategy to promote independence. The curriculum includes a range of apprenticeships, delivers the Work and Skills Leicestershire Careers Advice Service, and is also supporting leading the Multiply programme for the County Council, and that's a programme that supports adult numeracy, a 3-year programme that is due to finish in 2025. The service is funded externally and receives funding from the Education Skills Funding Agency. And the purpose of the funding is to engage adults and provide them with skills they need to progress either in work or further learning. There's also flexibilities with the funding to help people build confidence and support their well-being. At the last Ofsted inspection in 2018, the service was graded good. The service completes a self-assessment report, an annual self-assessment report, and there were 3 primary areas that required further improvement: English, maths, essential digital skills, and the achievement rates for some demographic groups. So moving on to section 8, the performance update. The service was quite significantly hit by the pandemic, with learner numbers declining significantly. And numbers have been recovering. Last year we saw a bounce back of numbers, and more recently the improvements steadied. So there's been a slow recovery over the recent months. So some further work to do there. And you can see that on the chart. Paragraph 10 covers the achievement rates, of which is a key performance measure used by Ofsted. This measure indice is a percentage of those learners that achieve over the numbers that start their programs. So that complete their programs and go on and complete their qualifications. The position is fairly positive. We've seen an increase this last year, so we're back to pre-pandemic achievement rates, which is positive. English and maths, however, remains a challenge, as does digital skills, and we've seen a small decline in some of those English and maths programs, a more significant decline in the digital skills, essential digital skills program. Learner feedback is extremely positive. 97% of learners strongly agree that the courses have helped them in their work at home or in the communities. And likewise for well-being, 97% of learners have said that it's been a positive impact on their well-being. Safeguarding remains good. Learners report that they feel safe on their programs and on site, and we've got robust procedures in place surrounding safeguarding. So that's that covers the performance update. I don't know whether it's a good place to stop for any questions before I move on to.
I think the way we work, Paul, is you have to assume that everybody's read the report. So what we're looking for you to do is just highlight any points you feel that you might want to reinforce to significance, rather than just go through sort of each bit by bit. So I don't know if you finish off the whole report, if there's any bits there you wish to highlight which you feel might not be as clear in the report, and then we'll come back to you with questions, because I think we all do diligently read the reports. Okay, thank you, Chair. So really just for the achievement rates, that's the recovery around the achievement rates and the challenges with English and maths provision has been challenging. I think it's been challenging nationally. We know we actually compare quite well with the national benchmarks. There was last year was the first year of grading by the awarding bodies. Previously, English and maths during the pandemic was tutor assessed grades. So it's all been a little bit of a mixed picture nationally to benchmark against. So I'll move on to the accountability statement, just cover it quickly. The accountability statement is a new requirement, as it says in the report, that should strengthen programme planning, and it's useful. It's an additional requirement for us to complete, but I think it will help in terms of the robustness of that planning and the engagement of stakeholders. And this comes at a time where there's funding, as you'll know, for districts around skills through the Levelling Up funding. So I think that engagement is going to be important to avoid duplication of effort as we go forward. Paragraph 17-18 notes how the curriculum is aligned to the themes within the Council's strategic plan. The document itself is very prescribed. It's by the Department for Education, so we've followed the format of that's required. Paragraph 20 onwards covers a brief summary of the proposals for work in the next academic year. It's quite an ambitious plan, I think, in terms of what we intend to deliver. Increasing learner numbers, engaging more learners, performance of English and maths, expansion of ESOL,
and prioritise apprenticeships, mental health, family learning and programmes for supporting learners with additional needs. We also want to work on the success of the Multiply programme. The first year's just been completed. That programme actually runs by financial year rather than academic year, which adds another complication for us. But so we want to build on that. The timeline for the accountability statement just due to be finalised and completed by July the 1st and published on the council's website. That covers the update from. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Do you have any questions for Paul? That you've stunned them into silence. So the only question from me is that clearly there are two cohorts for this, aren't there? So there's people who have come into the country who may not speak English as a first language, etc. But equally, with where we've seen a massive reduction, and particularly in maths and English skills in schools. I mean, I think we've now got the worst turnout since pre-Victorian days of people being able to read and write. It just strikes me the future need for this service is going to be colossal because either kids have disappeared from school or they're not being taught at school. So are we able to map what we will need going forward? Because my big fear is that with the, I think the average reading and writing age for, I think it's 40% of the people who go to school is age 8. We're building up a colossal problem for the future, and how will the service adapt to future needs? And how will it identify those future needs?
Yeah, thanks for that question. The program, the Multiply program's a good example. How supporting adults, there's certainly funding being put into supporting numeracy, probably not so much literacy at the moment, but we're certainly seeing people coming out of schools affected by the pandemic, and so we're getting learners coming through, particularly males, more than females, who are not performing well as well in their results coming into the programs. So there is a real challenge, and it is something nationally adult learning services are trying to tackle. I think engaging people into those programs is a challenge. We've seen learner numbers decline, and engagement of male adults in numeracy, for example, is not as fewer male adults go into learning than female adults. So it kind of exacerbates the problem. It's not fixing the problem. So linking up with, we do have family learning programs as well, and I think earlier intervention and working with schools where we can, academies, is a way forward, and try and break in that cycle. But yeah, it's certainly a challenge.
Thank you for that, Paul. I think we keep a close eye on this one because, as you say, I think this could be something that becomes a larger issue for the services we provide in years to come, if we're not careful. So we're now moving on to, I think, what's the final report today, which is the report number, agenda item 15, which is the Market Sustainability and Improvement Fund, which actually says John's going to present the report. This is going to be supported by Interjet. So there you are. You just sit there and be quiet, Interjet, and let John get stuck in.
I shall introduce as usual, Chair. So it's a report which we are providing to committee retrospectively in some ways, which is not something we would normally do. But on this occasion, we thought it was important that we did so. And the Market Sustainability and Improvement Fund was announced in the local government settlement at the end of the last year, but we didn't actually get the grant determination letter until the 4th of April. And the submission had to be in by the 24th of May. So it sort of sat between committees. so we weren't able to bring a report prior to the submission, which is why we're bringing one in retrospect. And I think it's fair to say that the submission that we've made meets most of the target, well, meets all of the target areas that the government have asked us to address, but also is in line with previous reports that we brought to committee, particularly around the fair cost of care. So when the government announced the fund, Leicestershire had 5.6 million-ish of money for this year, and there will be a further tranche of money for next year. 1.6 million of that had already been committed through last year's expenditure into care home fees. We were then given an option of 3 areas that we could spend the money. One was further expenditure against care home fees, not just care home fees, actually provider fees. The second area was around reducing the number of people waiting for assessment and review. And the third area was around workforce. And we've chosen to spend against all 3 areas. So we are looking particularly to focus in terms of workforce on the personal assistant role. So this is where people take a direct payment and employ personal assistants. And it's an area where we think that it's underdeveloped in Leicestershire, and we want to help develop that area. So we're spending just over £500,000 there. In terms of people waiting for care and assessment, as we mentioned earlier in the meeting, we brought a report last year which detailed our approach to how we manage the numbers of people who are waiting. And again, in this report, we're just giving a summary of the numbers of people who are waiting in January for assessment and review. So we're looking to spend just under £1 million to address that issue and to reduce the numbers of people who are waiting. But then the vast majority of the spending is to try to bridge the gap between what we currently pay providers as our usual fee rates and the analysis that was undertaken last year around what the actual cost of care might be. So that's where we're planning to spend the money. There is a further submission that we can make towards the end of June, which will include information around demand and capacity in the market, and certainly Indy and Kate will be able to talk about that particular issue. And then, as I say, we'll probably get a further tranche next year, and we expect that to be a further 5.6 million again, but probably an increase in that funding. So again, there's an opportunity to review our position next year.
Questions for John? Bill?
Yes, it's interesting how the government does these things, but funding is for 2 years. There's no guarantee after those 2 years this funding is going to be available. If it's not available, what happens to the service you already provided?
So yes, it's a good question. So our expectation is that it will go into the local authority baseline. So it's a new award of money. So when this goes back a bit, but when the government announced their adult social care reform, and they were going to make all the changes to the way that people paid for care and all of that sort of thing, this was the money that was set aside for it. And then when they sort of retracted on a whole number of those elements, the one element that they retained particularly was this issue about the cost of care. So in retaining that, they also retained some elements of the funding that they were going to give to local authorities. And this is the sort of this is that funding, if you like. So we get this amount. Last year we got 1.6 million. This year we've got 5.6 million. Next year we'll probably get 7 point, I can't remember the exact figure, but 7 point something. But then that will be built into the baseline. So we get that every year thereafter is the thinking.
No, I just love the thought. I just love the thought that any one political party of whatever persuasion actually believes that funding will carry on ad infinitum without being changed. So I suppose the only party that can do this are the Lib Dems, because they won't be running the country. But have to make a political point occasionally. What I would say on this one is that I think as a council we've done exceptionally well. We did the fair cost of funding. I think we did a lot of work on it. I'm sure it was the year before last now, John. Can't believe it was last year. Was it last year? I actually got something right and then talked myself out of it. I said earlier it must have been the year before. And I think, one thing that perhaps we should highlight is that we're probably nearer to the fair cost of funding than most councils in the country. So I think we have a lot to be proud of in Leicestershire, despite the limits to our resources, which we all recognise. And I think it's something that comes up in every council meeting, and the leader of the council is not slow in coming forward to saying that we need more money, and he's absolutely right. But despite that, I think we've made great strides in actually being as fair to providers as we can, which I think has two results. Number one, it puts us in a good light for our residents, and also those people self-funding aren't being asked to pay disproportionately huge amounts to make up for the deficit in what they get from local government. So I think we've got a lot to be proud of. I think you're absolutely right, Bill, that we've got to keep an eye on the funding that comes in, which we always do on this committee. Going forward, and to keep these things under review. But I think Indigit wants to come in.
Just quickly, so John referenced the capacity plan, which you've got to submit at the end of June. So that is essentially asking us around our current kind of what we think about our market today, what are our numbers going through, and gaps within that marketplace. So it covers across the range of adult social care, and then it goes on to our future projections and what we think we might need moving forward. So a lot of the kind of questions around the capacities, around like where our growth lies, where we think it's going to be and what it's going to cost us. So, around what John was saying around the funding bit, there are links between the two bits. So it doesn't suggest that they're going to say you need all this capacity and we're going to take a load of money off you. It seems just the other way around. And onto your point around time limited funding. So stuff like the hospital discharge service we spoke around carers. So that is linked to a different grant, a hospital discharge grant, which we're not banking on receiving that ongoing. We know that's potentially time limited. So the stuff we're going to commission and use from that is going to be a time limited response. So we're really clear on that. But this kind of money, we're thinking it's going to be a longer term model.
Thanks. And I think there is the other aspect as well, which we discussed last meeting on the meeting before. We have fewer people receiving nursing care funding from the NHS than any other county in the country, more or less. And therefore there is something broken in Leicestershire, and therefore if that nursing care was being prescribed and funded as it should be by the NHS, it would leave us with more funding for those in residential care, as it were. So again, I know it's something the officers are fighting very hard on, particularly working with our health colleagues through the ICBs, etc., to make sure that we are treated the same as every other county in the country. So I think there's lots that's being done on this point to make sure that we can direct funding to exactly where it needs. And I think this is where we've got to see these reports sometime as greater than the one report, but within the whole of what we're doing in terms of that. And then a success in one area actually gives us dividends in another. Do I have any further questions? No. Well, thank you all for what I think has been an excellent meeting today. I said it's great when everybody participates and asks questions. I believe it helps us produce better outcomes and gives us the answers. Agenda item 16 has got the dates for future meetings. So at least we know if we're on this committee where we are up to the end of 2024. So could I ask members to agree the dates of the meeting shown in agenda item 16? All happy?
Yep.
There are no other items, so thank you for attending today's meeting. I thank all the officers for their presentations and answers to the questions, everybody else for coming, and any members of the public who are online for sticking with us. And I hope they found it as interesting as I hope we have today. Thank you all.